So, hey, welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I am really happy to have Patrick Hardy with me. Patrick is awesome. He's a disaster preparation recovery, but he likes to call it disaster reversing expert. He's a keynote speaker. If you get a chance to get on YouTube and just see some of the talks he's done to his clients, they're fantastic, full of energy. Enjoying having him on. It's a very important topic that nobody in our industry, well, we always talk about it a little bit, but it seems to be like nobody takes it seriously. So, hey, Patrick, thank you for coming on.
Greg, thanks for having me. I'm excited about this today. It's gonna be fun.
So, disaster preparation, recovery, and reversing expert. You started out in Louisiana as an emergency management.
I did. I tell people this story. I was a swimmer. That's how this whole thing really started. I was a high school swimmer, and I was never going to be Olympic competitive. I was 5'6", really thin. Just what was never going to happen. And so, but the coach said, listen, a lot of these guys want to go to CIF. And so we need somebody to do these long distance events, the 500, the 1,000, the mile. And I said, I'll do those three events because I really enjoyed swimming. I like it, but I was never trying to win or get scholarships or anything. My strengths lie elsewhere. But I did those ones. And so anyway, at the end of the swim season, a bunch of guys said, listen, we're going to try out for lifeguarding. And there was an open water lake. It's a freshwater lake that was near where I lived. And a lot of the guys said, we're going to try out to be lifeguards. And the lifeguard test was you had to swim the length of the lake and then swim the length back, then swim halfway out. And then there was a beach there and you had to run the entire length around the lake. And so I was there with all these other guys and I was the only one that made it. All these really talented swimmers. I was able to pass that part of the test. It was the very first test. I mean, they literally said, if you don't pass the test, like you can't move on. And it wasn't because I was a better swimmer than they were. It was because I was trained to do the longer distance kinds of swimming. So anyway, at the end of the lifeguarding season, some guys said, we're going to become EMTs. I became an EMT. I became a medic. And then I was going to college and I was studying political science. And so that was one of the majors I had. And when I graduated, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I just wasn't really sure. And then the question was answered on August 28th, 2005, which was at the time of Hurricane Katrina. And so I decided that, I'm going to merge this vocational background that I had in EMS and lifeguarding and all that stuff. And I'm going to merge that with my love of political science and economics and communications. And I put those together and I said, this is a problem that I can approach in my lifetime. This is solvable. These are issues and problems that humanity can solve in disaster management. So I ended up writing a letter to the governor of Louisiana. And I said, listen, I'm a nobody. I don't have credible connections. My parents are teachers. I mean, I don't have anything. But I would love to be a disaster planner. There clearly is a lot going on in Louisiana. This is a great chance to actually be on the ground floor of it. And I would love to come and work for you. So anyway, I got a call 2 weeks later and they said, hey, this is wonderful. We've never had anybody write a letter like this before. So here's the deal. We'll give you a place to live. You can live in the state police barracks. We'll give you food. You can just eat at the cafeteria. And we'll pay you $1,500 a month, a whopping $1,500 a month.
Beautiful.
And then but we will authorize you to train in anywhere in the Homeland Security system you want to. You can do all the trainings you want, anyone you want. And you work for us 110 hours a week. How's that sound? And I said, I'm on the next plane. So it was a great experience. I got to meet with people. I got to be at the ground floor. I got to see responders. I got to talk about recovery. I got to be in I got to read all kinds of plans and train and drill. And it was a really wonderful place because emergency management was evolving. Hurricane Katrina really changed the way it was done. So, and then from there, I went to Europe. I went to graduate school. I came back, and I won a business prize while I was there. And I opened a small business disaster firm. And so I've even worked. I'd been a Fortune 500 consultant at one point, and I did a lot of things. I worked on the spill, and so I ran this company for a really long time. And so now I'm a content guy. So I'm really trying to change the culture of disaster management. I really want to change the way people approach it and see it. So that, Craig, that is my story.
Is it part of the process of changing it, convincing people to anticipate it?
Yeah. And I tell people, look, this is my major thesis that when you look at an event, an earthquake is just an earthquake. It's just a ground shaking. That's it. A hurricane is just a severe windstorm. That's really what it is. In the end, that really is what it is. A tsunami is ultimately a big wave of water. And the question that I pose to everyone is when does that become a disaster? It doesn't become a disaster until you let it become one, because the way we look at things, the way I tell people a disaster occurs is when you have a dependency. Your dependencies determine whether or not it's a disaster. It's not the size of the category of the hurricane or the number on the Richter scale. It's a matter of what your dependencies are. Are you dependent on one vendor to provide your business with a service? If you live in a house and you don't have any other place to go, you are now dependent on your house to do everything. You don't have a way to evacuate. So that's the way I turn it. And I tell people, I say, if you do a little bit of planning, you can actually make the disaster. And like you were saying in the very beginning, you can reverse it. You can actually make it so that it's to your advantage. It gives you a way to take what's going on around you to improve yourself, improve your life, improve your business. A really simple example is I go to businesses all the time and I say, look, if you have a massive hurricane and you're open and your competitors aren't open, guess what? You're going to make a lot of money and they're not, because you're going to have responders. So for example, if you own a restaurant, I actually had an Italian restaurant one time who I just said, get reopened as fast as you could. We got them reopened after Hurricane Harvey, which occurred in Texas and Houston. We got them reopened in 9 days. And they actually did so much business. They did more business in the next 30 days than they'd done in the previous 4 months. So they were able to get together because we created backups. We created vendor backups. We created ways for them to get employees back. And they had this wonderful culture. And we'll talk about that today. But it's the culture that they got together to say, not only is this something that's not going to hold us back, it's actually going to give us a strategic advantage.
You talk about something interesting, and I'm just sitting there thinking about the wheels of my head are starting to turn. I'm thinking about if people talk about disasters, Katrina, 9/11, but I'm thinking about in the Wall Street Journal, last couple of days, hackers infiltrated a software company that supports 25,000 car dealers around the country. And today the article was, if you think this just affects car dealers, you're wrong. Car dealers do $25 billion a month in GDP. So you are going to be affected. We are going to be affected. We're thinking about this software company, the ability to reverse it. But why weren't you thinking about what happens if we get hacked? Why are they your only supplier?
Right. Yes, that's absolutely right. Because ultimately, in the end, that's the dependency. They don't realize it yet, but that would not have become a disaster had they not allowed it to be. Because they have one dependency, they have one vendor who's providing it. And then when you have a disruption, your entire operations are now in a place where you can't not only to come back, you can't actually take an advantage of it because you're not in a position, you are reacting. You're in a reactive recovery position. And so what I try to train people in is I say, if you focus it and we're able to give you things, now you're open, your competitors aren't. Instead of someone buying a Nissan down the street, they're now buying from you because you're open. This happened actually with casinos too. And I have never gotten to use it, but I actually had a wonderful idea about how we would be able to recover them, because I just thought if slot machines aren't open, there are other methodologies. You just have to say, how are we going to do this otherwise, and how can we take advantage of it? Because there are other games that people can play where you can still continue to monetize it, other monetizable streams. People are already on vacation. So I think people will just have to think about it not as a reaction, but as, how am I going to take advantage of this? Just like anything else in business, how do we look at this as a way to give myself a strategic advantage? And that's what I teach.
That's absolutely the right way to be thinking about it. I think about Boeing, Boeing's in the news a lot lately.
Yes.
But I think about the MAX. I'm sitting there thinking of Southwest Airlines. They fly one airplane, the 737. Mm-hmm. And if all they had was a fleet of MAXes, you're in a bad spot. Yeah, diversity. I think about part of disaster, reversing disaster, disaster recovery. Once again, anticipating it, thinking about all the what if scenarios every day. Where am I vulnerable?
And people forget it's not just about, Craig, because I think what happens, and this happens a lot in the transportation industries, I've seen this a lot, which is that people will, they'll hire big consultants or they'll do it internally. They'll hire somebody and they'll create these beautiful big disaster plans and nice binders. They'll do the trainings, the whole thing. And then in the end, they're no more prepared really than they were before because they've created these plans in kind of a silo, right? Where it's only the folks at the top. They haven't really thought about how are we going to handle this. Instead, they say, okay, we're going to deal with evacuation. You're going to go here. You're going to do these things. With these people, we'll talk to the media if we have that. But, these people are going to do this stuff. And everyone else, just do what you're told. I see that all the time. And the problem is that disenfranchises employees. And that's our most valuable resource. I mean, that's the one we talk about all the time. We say, our people is what makes this stuff work. So when we disenfranchise them, then they're not part of the process. They're not bought in. We learned this during COVID. I went to companies and said, listen, if you're closed right now, start talking to your employees about what they want to do, how they want to come back, because it's not just about you. It's about them too. Because the world is going through a paradigm shift. There are going to be people, and I was saying this in April of 2020, I said, there are going to be people who are going to turn to you and say, I don't want to go back to the office. And you have to be prepared for that. And if you fight that, then you're going to alienate employees and people are going to leave. Instead, you have to look at it as to how can I take this to my advantage? Do I still want to work with these folks, or do I want to give them an opportunity to work for other people so I can hire people that more fit into the culture that I want to develop at the office? That's resiliency, right? That's going back and saying, how can I actually give it sort of a strategic advantage? I'm now stronger afterwards versus being reactive. And like you were saying, if you're relying on one vendor or one product to perform a certain service, if something happens to that product or service with the vendor, not even you, with the vendor, you're going to take the heat. And I think what we're seeing a lot is, especially with the MAX conversation, the 737s, is that now you have tied yourself. You are now dependent on everything that happens, and that's totally out of your control. Those are things that are whatever happens there. And with other companies, I think that's got nothing to do with you. It doesn't matter. And I've heard executives say this to me before. Well, that's not us. We have this, we have that. And they say, people don't care. There are issues with the 737 MAX. There are questions of a cover up. And I'm not saying it's true, untrue. I'm not making any observation on that. It's what people are perceiving. And the fact that you've made yourself dependent on what people think based on information that happens to be put on the internet or on social media, you are now owning that because that's all you have versus being able to diversify. And I think that's where a lot of the problems lie.
Shouldn't that be a conversation? I mean, you talk about disenfranchising or, having employee buy-in. I don't care how big the company is. Shouldn't you be, reminding your folks every day, what are the what if scenarios? What are the what if scenarios? Look, COVID, you're right. COVID, the work from home thing, provided great opportunities for companies to say, hey, look, we can, we don't need people in San Francisco now. Let's go hire people in Indianapolis who could do the same job at half price at Indianapolis wages versus San Francisco wages. It's an opportunity.
It is. And one of the things that I do, for example, when I conduct trainings at companies, whether or not I wrote the plan or not is irrelevant. When they hire me, and sometimes I get hired as a keynoter and they'll say, hey, listen, will you stick around and do a training? Would you train our executive team on this disaster plan? Would you train our trainer managers, or would you train, the employees at large? I say, sounds great. And the first thing I do is I walk in front of them and I pose questions to them and I engage them, because I don't want to be a lecturer on the stage. I want to be asking you things. Because I know how you're supposed to evacuate. I know what the business continuity plan has because I've read it. Because I've gone on stage, I've read the plan, 1,200 pages, 12,000 pages. It doesn't matter. For example, I recently got hired by a company in the Middle East that works in petrochemical. That plan that they're asking me to write is going to be somewhere in the area of about 6,000 pages. I'm not writing it only myself. I have other people who are writing it as well. It's covering a myriad of hazards, but you have to realize how complex it is. There's offshore issues, there's onshore issues, you have refineries, you have people, you have remote offices, you have a lot of things going on there. How do you make all those things work? Do you have IT, all that stuff? But when I go to employees in those kinds of trainings, I walk up to them, and again, I don't care how long it is, I'll walk up to them and say, this is how we're planning to do it. Do you think that that's best? I'll do that sometimes, or I'll do this. Without even asking, I'll say, okay, for building or facility or property X, where do you guys think would be the best place to evacuate? And I don't even prompt them. I just say, where do you think is a great place to evacuate? And people will say, over here or over there, or over here or over there. And sometimes it fits with the plan and sometimes it doesn't. But I always ask them, why did you come to that conclusion? And they'll say, because of this. And that literally will help me in the plan. And but the major reason why I do that, even if I don't take what they have to say and incorporate it in the plan, or if the company decides not to, at least I asked them. I included them in the conversation and said, you matter. Your ideas matter. What you think matters. Because this is in a lot of cases, I'll go to workforces and they'll literally think that factory is their factory. They won't think it's Boeing's factory or so-and-so's factory. It's their factory because they work there every
They own it.
Right, exactly. They own
ownership.
Right, because they work there every 5 days a week, and sometimes they work longer than 8 hours. They're in there all the time. That's where their colleagues are and their friends, and sometimes even family members have actually been to laboratories where there were literally fathers and sons and even grandfathers occasionally, where there was multi-generations of people working in the lab at various stages of their career. And one of the things I've done is I say, you need to incorporate everybody because generations are very different. A great example of this is when you work with young millennials, and younger millennials now are starting to get into the early stages of management, right? So these are people who were born after 1997-ish, and people who are Gen Zers. They want to be part of the conversation more than, say, my father's generation was. They ask questions. So I incorporate them and I say, it's a chance to create that culture. The culture of inclusivity, of we care what you think about, not just because of some external factor. It's because we want to, because we know it's your place. You work here. You're committed to that. Why fight it? That's why I tell C-suites all the time. Why are you fighting that? They don't really own it. They know they don't really own it, but every day they own it. So you have to take ownership of that and incorporate that. If you do that, your program is so much stronger.
Yeah, I got you. I got to think, disaster planning, disaster reversing is a process. Is it a multi-step process? Is it a repeatable process, or is it somewhat individualized, based on company, based on person, based on, different factors that you're looking at as far as
I'm concerned, it's a cycle. And in fact, in my book, the way I've organized my book is the way that you should really be organizing. It's kind of the chronology of a disaster, a disaster life cycle. So I start with the ready, and the ready part is preparedness, and the ready part is plans, training, drills. Then you go into the react phase, which is the moment a disaster or an incident occurs. Right. So the moment the earth starts shaking, or the moment we hear there's going to be a Cat 5 hurricane, or when there's going to be a tornado touchdown. And then you have the response phase, which is what I like to call the lights and sirens phase of disasters. So it's evacuating, it's sheltering in place, it's locking down, it's protecting property, it's protecting safety, all those things. Then you go to the recovery phase, and the recovery phase is where you are just getting the operations back into place. So you're putting back, you're ensuring your human resources are there. You may make sure that your accounting department is back. The critical processes at a minimum that you must have to continue to be in business. That's what goes on in that phase. Because then the reversing part is so much fun. That's the last stage, the fifth of the 5 R's: the ready, react, respond, recover, and then reversing. Because once you've done those previous 4, the reversing part is fun, because now you get to strategize. How can I do this better? How can I make this stronger? The story I like to tell is about Thomas Watson, who was the founder of IBM. And during the Great Depression, his sales team was very nervous, and they were very concerned because he called a meeting and he thought they were going to do mass layoffs. And Watson went to the front of the stage and he turned to everybody and he said, I'm going to double our workforce. I'm going to double our sales teams. But what that means is every single one of you has to work as hard as you possibly can, because I'm not going to fire or lay off anybody, nobody. But it just means you have to work harder for me. You work harder for me, I work harder for you. And he doubled his workforce, and as a result, the company just exploded in size after World War II. And he did that because he wanted to demonstrate to his people that he made a commitment to them, that it was sort of a social and sort of a social contract that he had with them, saying, we have to put into place a company that is going to last, whether it's a downturn or whether or not, the economy is booming. And that's what he tried to do. And so when I talk to companies, I say, follow those 5 R's that I lay out. If you follow those, you will find that you will be stronger afterwards. Your dependencies will be fewer. And as a result, your plans are more effective. Why are you paying a ton of money for this beautiful disaster plan and then you don't tell anybody about it? Well, what's the point of having it? Why do you do boring trainings? Why are you doing a training that nobody wants to be at? Because nobody cares. Right. So that's why when I do the trainings with them and I'll say to them, hey, listen, we're going to do a shelter in place. They go, okay, no, right now. No, this minute. We're going to do a shelter in place right now. And so I say to people, pull the stuff off the hotel. We literally take like the water from the hotel and we did I duct tape the doors. We do the whole thing because I want to demonstrate to people this stuff can be engaging. And so, and how these processes go together, because ultimately in the end, Craig, it's very kinesthetic, kind of like being a pilot. Right? You can't just do it on the ground. You actually have to be in the air. You have to be with the aircraft. You have to spend time, because the elements are around you, whether you're instrument rated or not. You have to, look around. How are you perceiving the aircraft? How is the aircraft performing? Is there something that you need to do to prevent additional pilot error? And that's what I do in disasters. I tell people it's like that's not like that. It's a matter of like working these things out, and that's how it has to go.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, that's where I think the biggest enemy is complacency. I mean, you put these things in place, but people are like, oh, it's such a small chance it'll ever happen, and not in my lifetime. Why are we doing this? Well, because. And you think about like I said, now, it's disaster planning comes in a lot of different ways. It's not just the Exxon Valdez running into a reef off of Alaska. It's what happens if our software gets hacked, and we can't pay people, or we can't deliver product, or what happens if the only company in the neighborhood pulls out, and now everybody's jobless. I mean, that's the whole
and it's very negative, right? Versus if we turn to people and say, instead of worrying about it as a disaster, we say, great, we ever have a cyber attack, I want us to know that we can be stronger afterwards. And by the way, here's our strategy. So that it's like an opportunity that you would have never had in business. When I was CEO and I had one client, I was trying to think of, how am I going to handle the next thing? How am I going to handle this? But once I started to grow with clients kind of told me things that are going to be important to them, but I grew the business. And I thought, but if I ever have a wonderful opportunity, if I ever get on, if the company really explodes, then I need to have a strategy in place just as much as I would if there was something else. I joke around when I actually work with families. I work with a lot of high net worth families. And there are times, and I've actually sat down and I actually have 3 clients who won the lotteries. And so these were instant millionaires. Many of them basically ultra high net worth, at a couple of them whose their net worth were probably around $50 million. And I sat with them and I said, you winning the lottery is the worst thing that could have ever happened to you. It could also be the greatest thing that ever happened to you. It's your choice. But today's conversation is going to determine whether it's the best or the worst thing that ever happened to you. And so, and they're always incredulous. And I say, you're not used to being rich. you're not used to the behaviors that you have to have in success. So I tell people you have to be prepared for success as much as failure. That's a very common adage, but it's very applicable when I talk to companies and I say, hey, if your competitors are all out of business, if you don't have a strategy for being able to take advantage of that, then you're never going to improve. Then you lost that. That's a wonderful opportunity. The hurricane closed your competitors. Let's be ready for that. And it makes it really fun because then business leaders haven't thought in that way before because they always think the way others talk about it. Oh, this keeps me up at night. That keeps me up at night. And there's
I love the way you talk about it. Candidly, you talk about, hey, look, it's not the oh shit moment. It's let's flip the script. Where's the opportunity if this happens to us? Yeah. Yes, we should be doing everything we can to prevent it, but if it happens, how can we successfully come out the other side stronger? And that's a huge mental shift for people to think.
And I say this to leaders all the time. It doesn't matter whether I'm working with a bar, a restaurant, a nursing home, a charter school, an undersea cable operation, a beekeeping farm, and I do a lot of beekeeping farms. I have no idea how I got so many they're actually called apiaries, but anyway, so these are basically pollinator companies. And one of the biggest disasters they deal with is what happens if my queen dies? What happens because once the queen dies, the hive starts to go into this frenetic activity. Right? They're either going to requeen or are they going to go to a bee broker or whatever. And I say to them, what is the biggest weakness of your pollinators, of those bees? And is there something, if we get a new queen, are there specific traits that we can get in that new queen that will make your hive stronger? Because yes, the loss of the queen is a big deal, but let's think of it as an opportunity. And I think that seems really odd to people in Southern California. Deal with this all the time because I hear from them, well, we have a lot of Africanized bees. And for those of you who don't know, the Africanized genes are passed along from one generation to the next. And so when I see queens that die in Southern California, I turn to them and I say, why don't we take this opportunity to requeen with one that doesn't have the Africanized genes so that we can actually turn your hive around and make it better? So it just really depends on what people want and the kind of behaviors they want. And it's the same thing in the aerospace industry. I say to people, if you're going to look at it as entirely depressing, your employees are going to think that way too. They rely on you the same way. Actually kid around with folks. I say, you know what, your stewardesses actually are really great, or your stewards and the stewardesses, because when they're in the cabins, when there's turbulence, there's always a certain percentage of passengers who are nervous, right? They haven't flown a lot, they haven't flown at all, or they just have a lot of nerves around it. They have anxiety, whatever. They look to them. If they're not nervous, then they don't get as nervous, right? But if they see that the stewardesses are really nerve-wracking, all of a sudden the temperature in the room changes, right?
But that's
so I say this to employees.
That's a great time too. Those are the times you provide exceptional customer service. Okay, yes, this is a crappy situation, but we are going to do everything we can to treat the people, our customers, above and beyond their expectation, and you walk out the other side.
Yeah, and it makes a huge difference. You're absolutely right, which is providing that great customer service, that great customer experience, no matter what, helping people through it. And then at the end, they will see you and look at your corporate brand and say the corporate messaging here and the brand message that I experienced personally is X. And that's a great tool. That's a great tool to improve what you're doing. So, yeah.
Does everybody need to be doing though on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis? I mean, I got to think about it every day. It's certainly a what if scenario.
Oh, well, no doubt. And what I say to folks is I say, that a disaster can occur every day, and that's an opportunity for you every day. So when you have little things like a customer who approaches you and says, I had this incredibly awful experience on one of your flights. It was X, it was Y, it was Z. That's your opportunity to turn that around. You can turn that customer into a tremendous fan, someone who will then, purchase your credit card, or they'll become a frequent flyer, or they'll just fly you again whenever they can, with their families. But you need to empower your employees, and that's the message I give to all businesses. You need to empower your employees the way the Ritz-Carlton used to, where they said to any employee, that if you are able to, you can, if you see a customer and there is a problem, I empower you to take care of them. And that's what I tell people in aerospace. I say, if you're interacting with customers on a one-to-one basis, empower your employees. Don't have to go through 3 or 4 layers of management or people or supervisors. Just have them be able to troubleshoot, solve it, and move on. And that really prevents it from getting any worse. But the other answer to your question is that if managers don't care, the employees won't care. So every day you need to have people from management and supervisors who, when they see things that are unsafe, and it's not just an OSHA issue, I just mean things that are saying, here's how we be better prepared, and here's how we're going to improve our customer experience if XYZ happens. Because when they see that culture there, then it reinforces it on their own. I tell people, once you've gotten the culture to the point where people are self-reinforcing, when new employees generally come in, then they are automatically indoctrinated in this great culture of preparedness. So that's the reason why I really go to companies and I say, if you imbue that with certain employees, the entire culture of the company will change very rapidly.
Yeah, no, I think that mind shift, I'm just saying, listening to you talk, and I'm like, the complete mind shift of there is opportunity here. Always be seeking the opportunity to, bad things happen. Bad things will happen to companies, bad things will happen to people, municipalities, wherever. But there is always a mind shift where you can say, look, we know something is going to happen. Here's how you positively get through it. And here's how we get through it the other side together. I love it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's great. And that's one of the things I'm doing on my YouTube channel is that I'm having companies, and if anyone here wants to challenge me, I welcome you to do that. I'm doing a series of disaster challenges where I'm challenging the culture of a company, of how I can change that. So they'll give me a really difficult disaster challenge. So they'll say to me, I want you to, evacuate. I mean, the first video we did was kind of a funny one. It was with a nonprofit, a cat sanctuary. And we said, okay, we're going to take, Patrick, I want you to evacuate 230 cats off our property and you have 2 hours to do it. And I said, sounds good. But they had no disaster plan and no one had ever been trained. So I had to write the plan. I had to train everybody. And then we had to actually do the thing all in 2 hours. And I was trying to show the managers that it's not just the pieces of paper. It's not the wonder weapons, right, of disaster preparedness, which is, the red backpacks and stuff. Big deal. What matters is how you imbue the culture, because then those things come to life. Now they're so much more effective. And we do that because I wanted people to show that it can be fun. It can be interesting. If you give people interesting drills, you don't have to give the usual drills that we do all the time. Make them interesting so that people can actually see your company culture. And that's one of the things I'm doing on these videos is I'm working with companies and organizations and saying, let's put a really fun challenge together. And then I can essentially show people, look at the culture of the company. But here's the thing, that's not enough, because you have to reinforce it afterwards. You've got to reinforce, we care, this is of importance to us, and we're going to learn the lessons. Because every time you run a drill, every time you have a disaster, anytime you have anything, that's a great chance for you to learn. And it's a great chance for your employees to learn. And therefore, to your customers, see that you genuinely are committed to them and to their safety when they're with you.
I love it. That's awesome. So you've got a book out.
I do.
The title of the book is?
Design Any Disaster, the revolutionary method for approaching your next crisis or emergency. So it's basically what I was just talking about. It's blocked out into 5 units. So ready, react, respond, recover, and reverse disaster. And I incorporate a lot of stories. For those of you who have Audible, if you like my voice, you'll be able to hear it for 8 hours as I read it, because I read it myself. I went down to the studios and it was a lot of fun. But the book, essentially, its major thesis is you don't ever have to experience a disaster ever again. And I mean that. For those of you who work for someone else or you own your own company, you never have to experience a disaster again. But what you have to do is you have to position yourself in a way to take advantage of it. You have to position yourself in a way to get stronger. And sometimes I hear from people, so what in aerospace, they say, we have collisions, we have casualties and things. It doesn't mean we have to take advantage of the situation, but we can show people we're stronger and we're committed to it. But I will tell you, and this is just in my time in knowing this, which is that if you don't really care and you try and fake it, people will know. It will not take long for people to sort that out. So that's why the commitment, as you were mentioning earlier, is this something we have to do every day, every week, every month, every year? Yes, 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 yes. All those things. But they're subtle. Should you run an annual drill? Yes. Do you have to run one every day? No. Do you have to do planning every day? No. But do you have to train every day? No, but you should do it once every few months. But should you always make the commitment so that it's for the little things? That's the kind of stuff that you should be doing every single day so that people see that, yes, we care. Yes, management cares when something goes wrong. And they see that when a disaster occurs, that you are responding in the way you said you were going to respond. Because sometimes companies try to knee-jerk things. And I say, don't do that. I know that that's where you're used to, but we've changed that a little bit. So now we have to act on it. Otherwise, everything you've done will be a waste because people will figure it out. People have enough familiarity now. And you understand this, Greg, as much as I do. You've flown, on tons of flights as I have, is that you can tell when they care and when they don't. And when they don't, that becomes the real disaster.
Absolutely. Patrick, thanks for coming on today.
Greg, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
We'll put the book up in the show notes and your YouTube channel. Just Google, put Patrick Hardy in on the search and come up.
Yes, and you can also go to my website, disasterpatrick.com. Anyone who's here, all my information on keynoting. And as I said, if you would like to challenge me on YouTube, please do it. It's absolutely free. I'll come out. We could do a really fun training. There's lots of different really cool things that we can do to create a video that will support you, help create your culture. And as a thank you, I always provide a little bit of consulting in there so I can say, let's co-brand in a way that really makes sense for where you're at in your disaster journey and how I can better support you, your employees, and your customers. So Craig, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. I look forward to connecting with some of you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. I hope you enjoyed the latest edition of the Aerospace Executive Podcast. You can reach out to me directly, Craig at northstaresg.com, or check us out at www.northstaresg.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or on YouTube. Just do a search for Aerospace Executive Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Craig Pickett.